don't trust your brother." The whisper reached billionaire Daniel Whitmore 3 seconds before the boardroom doors opened. He stopped so suddenly that the executives behind him nearly collided. Cold white light spilled across the marble hallway, reflecting off polished shoes and the silver nameplate in his hand. Beyond the glass doors, 12 board members were waiting to approve the largest deal in Whitmore Industries history, a merger worth nearly $4 billion. Daniel slowly turned. Standing beside the service elevator was Emily Carter, his temporary secretary. Her navy coat was faded at the elbows, her shoes were wet from the rain, and one strap of her old canvas bag had been repaired with black thread. She had worked on the executive floor for only 11 days. Daniel's expression hardened. "What did you say?" Emily's fingers tightened around a thick gray folder. Inside her open bag, an old red accounting notebook rested beneath a child's yellow scarf. Its leather cover was cracked, and the corners had been softened by years of use. Before Emily could answer, Richard Whitmore stepped into the hallway. Daniel's older brother looked perfectly calm in his tailored suit. He had spent 30 years building the company beside Daniel, standing with him through their father's death, the recession, and every hostile takeover that followed. To the business world, the Whitmore brothers were inseparable. Richard glanced at Emily as though she were a stain on the carpet. "Is there a problem?" "No," Daniel said, though his eyes remained on the folder. "Miss Carter was just leaving." Emily's face flushed, but she did not move. She had spent the night in a laundromat because the heating in her apartment had failed again. Her 6-year-old son was sleeping at a neighbor's home, wrapped in the only warm blanket they owned. She knew that losing this job would mean missing rent. She also knew what men like Richard could do to people who stood in their way. Still, she stepped closer. "Sir, please read this before you sign." Richard gave a quiet laugh. "She schedules meetings and orders coffee. Now she's advising us on acquisitions?" 2 board members inside the room turned toward the glass, watching, then another. Within seconds, the entire boardroom had gone silent. Daniel lowered his voice. "Emily, whatever this is, give it to legal." "I tried." Her answer was barely audible. Daniel noticed the small cut across her palm, as if she had spent hours opening old storage boxes. He also noticed that she was trembling, not like someone who had invented a story, but like someone who had found a truth too dangerous to carry alone. The boardroom clock struck 9. Richard reached for the folder. "I'll take care of it." Emily pulled it against her chest. For the first time, Richard's smile disappeared. Daniel looked from his brother to the frightened young woman in the worn coat. Then he pushed open the boardroom doors. "Everyone sit down." The directors exchanged confused glances as Emily entered behind him. She seemed painfully small beneath the towering windows and the enormous city skyline. A security officer appeared at the far end of the hallway, summoned by someone inside. Richard leaned close to Daniel. "You're humiliating this family." Daniel placed the unsigned merger contract on the table. "Then this should only take a minute." Emily set the gray folder in front of him. Her hand hovered over it before she let go, as though releasing it might change all their lives. Daniel opened the cover. The first page contained a bank transfer bearing his electronic signature. The second contained a death certificate, and clipped beneath them was a photograph of Richard standing beside a man Daniel buried 12 years ago. Daniel's face drained of color. Around the table, no one breathed. Then Emily opened her old red accounting notebook and said, "That isn't the worst page."
Daniel stared at the photograph until the faces blurred. The man standing beside Richard was Nathan Cole, the former chief financial officer of Whitmore Industries. 12 years earlier, Nathan had been accused of stealing millions from the company. Before the investigation could reach court, his car had gone off an icy bridge. Daniel had attended the funeral. He had watched Nathan's wife place a white rose on the coffin. He had carried guilt ever since, believing the pressure of the scandal had driven an innocent-looking man to a desperate end. Yet the photograph in Emily's folder had been taken only 3 months ago. Richard rose from his chair. "This is fabricated." Emily did not look at him. She turned a page in the old red notebook and placed it beside the photograph. "Then explain these numbers." The handwriting was small and precise. Dates, account codes, wire transfers, and company initials filled every line. Daniel recognized several shell corporations connected to the merger waiting for his signature. Richard's lawyer leaned forward. "Where did you get that notebook?" Emily closed it immediately. "It belonged to my father." The answer silenced even Richard. Emily had been 8 years old when her father, Thomas Carter, lost his job at a small accounting firm. For years, she believed he had simply failed. That was what people said when the electricity was shut off and her mother sold their furniture one piece at a time. "Your father made a mistake," neighbors whispered. "Some people aren't meant to handle money." Thomas never defended himself. He took night shifts cleaning office buildings, returning before sunrise with swollen hands and the smell of disinfectant on his clothes. But every evening, no matter how exhausted he was, he taught Emily arithmetic at their kitchen table. "Numbers don't lie," he often told her. "People hide behind them." The red notebook was always beside him. He called it his memory book. Emily never understood why he guarded it so carefully until the winter she turned 16. Her father collapsed while sweeping the lobby of a downtown bank. The illness had been growing inside him for years, but he had refused treatment because every dollar went toward keeping Emily in school. Before he died, he pressed the notebook into her hands. "One day, you'll know where it belongs." Emily carried it through college, through unpaid internships and rejection letters, and later into the tiny apartment where she raised her son alone. She studied accounting at night after putting him to bed, but she never finished her degree. When her husband left, tuition became groceries. The temporary secretary position at Whitmore Industries was supposed to last only 6 weeks. On her 3rd day, she noticed a vendor number on Richard's merger documents that matched one from her father's notebook. At first, she told herself it was a coincidence. Then she saw another and another. For 8 nights, Emily compared archived invoices during her lunch breaks. She searched public records on an old laptop with a cracked screen. She used the skill her father had given her, not merely reading numbers, but noticing which ones had been made to disappear. Daniel finally looked up. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Emily's voice trembled. "Because the last person who tried to expose this lost everything." Richard struck the table with his palm. "Enough! Remove her!" The security officer stepped forward. Emily lifted the yellow scarf from her bag. Sewn in surgery into its corner were the initials NC. Then she looked directly at Daniel. "Your dead financial officer gave this to my father the night before the bridge accident."
The security officer stopped beside Emily, but Daniel raised one hand. "No one touches her." Richard's face tightened. "You're letting a temporary employee turn a board meeting into a circus?" Emily placed the yellow scarf on the polished table. The fabric was faded and thin, the kind sold in airport gift shops years ago. One corner had been repaired by hand. Beneath the stitched initials, NC, was a dark brown stain that had never washed out. Daniel touched the scarf carefully. He remembered Nathan wearing it during a winter charity event 12 years earlier. Nathan's daughter had tied it around his neck and laughed because the color made him look ridiculous. Daniel had teased him about it for weeks. That memory was too specific to fake.
Richard noticed the recognition in his brother's eyes. A scarf proves nothing. No, Emily said quietly, but the pocket inside it might. A nervous murmur moved through the room. Richard's lawyer picked up the scarf and examined the seams. Inside the folded corner was a narrow, hidden pocket. It had already been opened, leaving a line of loose thread. "What was in there?" Daniel asked. "A storage key." Emily removed a small brass key from the gray folder and set it beside the notebook. She explained that after her father's death, she had kept the scarf in a cardboard box without understanding its importance. 2 months earlier, her son spilled juice across it. While washing it by hand, she felt something hard beneath the fabric. The key opened a private locker at an old train station scheduled for demolition. Inside, Emily found copies of invoices, coded ledgers, and a handwritten statement signed by Nathan Cole. Most of the papers had been damaged by moisture, but enough remained to connect Richard to a network of secret companies. Richard leaned back and smiled again, though the confidence had left his eyes. "And you expect us to believe a locker stayed untouched for 12 years? "I expected it to be empty," Emily replied. The board's senior attorney flipped through several documents. His expression changed as he reached the 3rd page. "These routing numbers are real." Richard turned sharply. They were stolen from internal files. Emily remained standing, her hands folded in front of her. She did not celebrate. She did not accuse him with anger. Her calmness seemed to make Richard even more furious. "You're a failed accounting student with no license, no influence, and no idea how companies like this operate." Daniel looked at her. Emily's worn shoes were dampening the expensive carpet. A loose thread hung from her coat sleeve. She looked as though she belonged anywhere but that room. Still, she held Richard's stare. "My father cleaned offices after your people destroyed his name. He understood your company better than anyone sitting here." Richard pointed toward the door. "Get her out." This time, several directors nodded. Doubt had begun to spread in the room. The photograph could be altered, the scarf could be stolen, the documents could have been planted by a rival trying to stop the merger. Daniel wanted to believe Emily, but believing her meant accepting that his brother had lied to him for more than a decade. The senior attorney removed his glasses. "Mr. Whitmore, we should pause the meeting and verify everything independently." "We signed today," Richard snapped. "Any delay destroys the deal." Emily glanced at the contract, then at the large digital clock above the boardroom doors. 9:17 a.m. Her face suddenly changed. She grabbed the merger agreement and searched the final pages. Richard lunged forward. "Put that down!" The security officer caught Emily's arm, but she did not resist. She simply pointed to a line near Daniel's signature box. "Look at the transfer time." Daniel read it twice. The merger funds were scheduled to move at 9:30 that morning, before the board had formally approved the deal. Only 13 minutes remained. Emily looked at him, fear finally breaking through her calm expression. "They're not waiting for your signature," she whispered. "They already have it."
Daniel's hand froze above the contract. At 9:18, the digital clock seemed louder than the rain striking the windows. 12 minutes remained before nearly $4 billion would leave Whitmore Industries and disappear into accounts controlled by people no one in that room had officially approved. The senior attorney grabbed the nearest phone. "Freeze every outgoing transfer." A pale voice answered through the speaker. "We can't. The authorization came from Mr. Whitmore's secure account 20 minutes ago." Every face turned toward Daniel. "That's impossible," he said. "My phone has been with me all morning." Richard stood slowly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Then someone in this room has made a terrible mistake." Emily looked at him. "No, someone planned for Daniel to discover the theft after it was too late." Richard's eyes sharpened at the use of his brother's first name, but Emily was already moving. She pulled the bank transfer from the folder and placed it beside the merger contract. Then she opened the old red notebook to a page filled with columns written in her father's hand. Daniel felt panic tightening around his chest. "What are you looking for?" The error they thought no one would notice. Emily compared the account numbers line by line. Around her, executives shouted into phones. Security locked the boardroom doors. The technology director opened his laptop, his fingers shaking as he searched the authorization records. At 9:21, he looked up. The digital certificate is valid. The voice confirmation matches Mr. Whitmore. The facial scan passed. Daniel's face went cold. Richard spread his hands. Perhaps my brother approved the transfer and forgot. Daniel moved toward him, but Emily stepped between them. Don't waste time defending yourself. Her voice was not loud, yet it cut through the room. She stared at the transfer document, then at the photograph of Nathan Cole. Something about the image bothered her. Not Richard's face, not Nathan's. The clock behind them. In the photograph, a digital display hung above the station entrance. It showed 7:42, yet the official metadata printed beneath the image claimed it had been taken at 6:15. Emily turned the photograph over. On the back, almost hidden beneath the adhesive strip, was a handwritten sequence of 6 numbers, her father's handwriting. She opened the red notebook and searched the margins. The same sequence appeared beside one sentence. When the false signature is perfect, follow the time that cannot lie. Emily looked at the transfer authorization again. The voice confirmation had been recorded at 8:59, the facial scan at 8:56, the final approval at 8:51. Approval had occurred before identity verification. "That's it," she whispered. Daniel leaned closer. "What?" "The system didn't confirm you and then approve the transfer. It approved the transfer first and added your identity afterwards." The technology director shook his head. "Our platform doesn't do that." "Not through the main platform," Emily said, "through the disaster recovery server." The room went silent. Only 3 people knew such a server existed: Daniel, Richard, and Nathan Cole. Emily pointed to an old internal code in her father's notebook. The code matched a retired emergency account, still embedded in the transfer trail. It had been created after a banking crash 14 years ago and was supposed to have been permanently disabled. The technology director typed the code. A hidden authorization window appeared. At the top was the name of the person who had activated it that morning: Richard Whitmore. Someone gasped. Richard rushed toward the laptop, but 2 security officers blocked him. His calm expression finally shattered. "You have no idea what you're doing." Emily looked at the clock. 9:26. The transfer could not be canceled through the compromised system, but the hidden window showed a second option: manual beneficiary verification. The receiving companies had 90 seconds to prove ownership, or the payment would automatically return. Emily selected it. Richard's voice cracked. "Daniel, stop her!" Daniel did not move. At 9:29, the boardroom watched the countdown reach 0. The transfer status turned red. Beneficiaries failed verification. Funds rejected. For one breathless moment, no one spoke. Then the technology director opened the attached ownership records. Every shell company led to the same private trust: Richard's Trust. Emily closed the red notebook. But Daniel was staring at another name buried beneath the records: the registered witness who had helped create the trust 12 years earlier: Thomas Carter, Emily's father. Emily stared at her father's name as though someone had struck her. Thomas Carter, registered witness. For years she had carried the red notebook like the last honest piece of him. Now his signature appeared beneath a trust created to steal from the company. Richard saw the doubt enter her face. "There," he said, "your father wasn't a victim. He was part of it." Emily's fingers went numb. Daniel studied the page. Thomas Carter's signature was unmistakable, the same careful curve on the letter T, the same narrow spacing she had seen in birthday cards, school notes, and the final message inside the notebook. The board members began whispering. Emily took a step backward. For the first time that morning, she looked small enough to disappear. "My father would never do this." Richard gave a bitter smile. "You never really knew him." Daniel turned toward his brother. "That's enough." But Emily barely heard them. Her eyes had fallen on the date beside her father's signature. It was the same date written on the final page of the red notebook. She opened it. The last 2 pages had always seemed blank, except for a faint brown mark near the binding. As a child, she had once asked her father why he kept empty pages in such an important book. "For what I'm not ready to tell you," he had answered. Emily lifted the notebook toward the boardroom window. Morning light passed through the thin paper, revealing lines pressed into it from writing that had been torn away. She found a pencil in the folder and gently shaded the page. Words began to appear. "I signed because they threatened my daughter." Emily stopped breathing. The next lines were weaker, as though written by a trembling hand. "Nathan refused to let them use me again. He hid the original records and gave me time to escape. I promised to protect his family if he protected mine." A memory returned with painful clarity. When Emily was 7, her father had brought a stranger home during a snowstorm. The man's expensive coat was torn, and fear filled his eyes. Thomas gave him soup, dry clothes, and the couch, even though their refrigerator was nearly empty. Young Emily had watched from the hallway as her father handed the stranger his only warm coat. "No one should face the cold alone," Thomas had said. The stranger was Nathan Cole. Years later, Nathan had discovered that Richard was stealing company funds. When he learned Thomas had been forced to witness the trust, he could have exposed him and saved himself. Instead, Nathan remembered the man who had opened his door without asking his name. He gave Thomas the yellow scarf, the storage key, and the evidence. The bridge accident had been staged. Nathan survived, but disappeared to protect his wife and daughter. Thomas kept the secret because Richard's people were watching both families. Emily turned to the photograph. Nathan was not meeting Richard as a partner. He was following him. The time discrepancy was Nathan's message, a warning hidden for anyone who understood Thomas's notebook. Daniel looked at Emily, his voice barely steady. "Your father spent the rest of his life protecting this?" "He spent it waiting for someone powerful enough to listen." The senior attorney examined the shaded page. "There's another line." Emily continued shading until the final sentence emerged. "The truth must reach Daniel, but only when Richard believes he has already won." Silence settled over the room. Daniel closed his eyes. 12 years earlier, Thomas Carter had sent 3 requests for a private meeting. Daniel's office had rejected all of them after Richard called him unstable. A cleaner had tried to warn a billionaire. The billionaire had been too busy to listen. Daniel opened his eyes, filled now with shame. "Your father came to me, didn't he?" Emily nodded. "You sent him away." Before Daniel could answer, the boardroom doors opened. 2 federal investigators entered with the head of corporate security. Between them walked an older man with silver hair and a familiar yellow scarf folded in his hands. Nathan Cole looked across the room at Emily. "Your father kept his promise. Now I'm here to keep mine." Nathan Cole's arrival broke the last illusion holding the room together. Richard stepped back from the table. "You're supposed to be dead." Nathan's tired eyes settled on him. That was the only way to stay alive long enough to prove what you did. The federal investigators moved toward Richard while the senior attorney handed them the gray folder. One document followed another: the hidden trust, the forged authorization trail, the shell companies, and Thomas Carter's final statement. Richard turned to Daniel. "We built this company together." Daniel looked at the brother he had trusted for most of his life. He remembered sharing a bedroom as boys, working weekends in his father's warehouse, and promising that no amount of money would ever come between them. But somewhere along the way, Richard had begun seeing loyalty as something he could purchase, threaten, or forge. "No," Daniel said quietly. "We inherited a name together. What we became was our own choice." As the investigators escorted Richard from the boardroom, he glanced back at Emily. For 12 years, powerful people had dismissed her father as a bitter, broken cleaner. Richard had expected his daughter to remain invisible, too. Instead, the woman in the faded coat had stopped him with 90 seconds left. The board meeting was canceled, the merger was suspended, and every account connected to Richard was frozen, pending investigation. Yet Emily did not feel victorious. She sat alone at the long table, holding the red notebook against her chest. The truth had cleared her father's name, but it could not return the years he had spent carrying shame in silence. Nathan lowered himself into the chair beside her. "Thomas saved my life twice," he said. Emily looked at him. "The first time was the night he gave you your coat?" Nathan nodded. "The second time was when he refused to surrender that notebook." He explained that Thomas had quietly sent copies of evidence to a protected legal office before his death. Nathan had remained hidden while investigators built a case strong enough to survive Richard's influence. Emily's discovery of the scheduled transfer finally gave them the proof they needed to act immediately. Daniel stood several feet away, unable to hide his remorse. "I can't undo what my family did to yours." "No," Emily said, "you can't." Her honesty landed harder than anger. Daniel nodded. "But I can make sure no one else is ignored because their shoes are worn or their title is small." In the months that followed, Whitmore Industries changed from the inside. Daniel created an independent ethics office that answered to no single executive. Employees at every level were given a protected way to report wrongdoing. Thomas Carter's name was publicly cleared, and the company repaid every dollar he had lost, with interest, to Emily and her mother. Daniel also offered Emily a senior position in financial compliance. She hesitated. "I never finished my degree." "You saw what an entire boardroom missed. We can help with the degree. Integrity can't be taught." Emily accepted on one condition: the company would fund scholarships for working parents who had abandoned school to care for their families. A year later, she stood in the same boardroom wearing a simple dark suit. Her old canvas bag rested beside her chair. Inside it were the yellow scarf and her father's red notebook. Her son sat near the window, swinging his legs proudly, as Daniel introduced her as the new director of financial integrity. Emily opened the notebook to its final page. Beneath her father's faded words, she wrote one sentence of her own. "Sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the truth everyone else is too powerful to see." And perhaps that is why kindness matters. A coat given during a snowstorm, a promise kept in fear, or a voice finally allowed to speak may seem small in the moment, but one day it can change the fate of an entire family. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment about someone whose quiet courage deserves to be remembered. Like, subscribe, and share it with a person who still believes that doing the right thing is never wasted.